When it comes to locomotive design and innovation, there are a lot of power options available to the designer. You could use steam, and like vinyl, this is making a comeback on the heritage scene. Some elect to use electric, diesel, petrol, maglev, or even hydrogen. The majority tend to go for the propulsion best suited to the line that the train is going to be designed for, and some elect to use a mix of fuels for versatility. But in New York, there was one train that used something that even then was completely bonkers: turbojets. So why on earth did the New York Central Railroad think that welding jet engines was such a good idea? Well, in the 1960s, like with most railways, the railroad was using passengers to the roads. Easier and cheaper access to cars meant that people were finding more convenient ways to travel, and the public highways and the new freeways were stretching over the country like an elaborate interconnecting web. Don Wurtzel, Assistant Research Director for the railroad, was given the task to turn the tide on the retreating masses to the roads. He knew that the key was not just in new, it was in speed, efficiency, and of course money. He knew that if the services and the new trains were cheaper to run, it would mean more profit for the company and a nice cheap ticket for the punter. But the only options to him were diesel, electric, and steam. Steam was out of the question. It was not going to reach the speed Wurtzel wanted, and it was getting very outdated. Diesel and electric were more common, but again reaching the speeds he wanted, it was going to take a very new type of engine, and one which would take years to develop. With the pressure from the company, Don knew he simply didn't have the time. In design engineering, you can easily overcomplex a solution to a problem, especially if that solution is staring at you in the face. In the realm of the 1960s, the high-speed train was only second to the high-speed jet plane. Jet engines. Not exactly the first thing when you think train propulsion. Also called gas turbines, jets have been around and developed a lot longer than many people think. On a basic principle, air is sucked into the engine by the use of a fan, where it's pushed through a compressor. The compressor forces the compressed air into the core of the engine, where it's saturated with fuel and given a spark to ignite the mix. As the pressurized gases expand, it's blasted out the back of the engine, pushing it forward. With a lot of power. Power that in Don's eyes were perfect for that high-speed train. He selected engines General Electric J4719 from a B-36 Peacemaker Army surplus plane. Each engine generated about 5,200 pounds of thrust and was the same model that are known to propel a car over 400 miles an hour. The railroad car was a Budd diesel car, which had been modified especially for the test. All creature comforts were removed to accommodate for the many gauges and equipment needed, and the front of the car received streamlined front cowling. Don's wife Ruth, who was also an inventor in her own right, decided that the jets would be best mounted on the front of the engine rather than at the back as intended. The front cowling was put through wind test to ensure streamlining before it was attached. Soon all was complete, and after only a budget of $35,000, the Black Beetle was born. They had the train, now all they needed was a test track. It was too risky to test the train in populated areas, so it needed both a straight line and a reasonably maintained one. They chose 21 miles of track between Butler in Indiana and Stryker in Ohio. On the 23rd of July 1966, after initial testing proved fruitful, the train was put through its paces and it rocketed down the track. The car reached a speed of 183.68 miles per hour, a record breaker still standing today. Even though this is exactly what Wurtzel wanted, why don't we use jets on trains today? Jet engines work best when they have uninterrupted high speeds. Turbines within the jets take time to reach optimum efficiency, and while the jet chains were perfect for fast passenger runs, they simply weren't right for anything heavier, and they were unsuitable for curvier tracks and multiple stops, hardly ideal for intercity travel. In the light of this, the idea was scrapped. But what of the Beetle? Well, after it was considered unviable for passenger circuits, Its speed and its racing had provided valuable data for the railroad and beyond. One of the data parameters found to be most useful was the data collected on the stresses on the rails following regular high-speed travel. Sadly, the data collected was mostly put on the wayside, as the New York Central Railroad was committed to other projects, including a new merger. The Beetle's jets were removed shortly after the trials had been completed, and although its racing days were over, it continued to work for the Penn Railroad until it was decommissioned in 1977. The jets never saw flight again, instead helping the railroad with an experimental snowblaster. It did a good job, too good in fact, as it tended to blast away ballast. The jets were modified to lower their output, and they were very successful for many years. Even though the record remains strong today and is unlikely to be beaten anytime soon, there is nothing left of the Black Beetle. The train melded into the Penn Railway's infrastructure and was likely scrapped at some point in her history and fame, probably being unknown to those who scrapped her. Luckily, her memory and her record is still around and is probably going to last for a while. As for jet trains, I think jet engines are best suited to the air rather than rails. But it'd make a very interesting experiment.